Hey everyone, and welcome back to Navigating Life with Neurodiversity. I'm Matt, somewhat of a neurodivergent storyteller, and today's episode is one I've been incredibly excited to share. Today is a deep dive into the music of Sleep Token and how their 3-album trilogy serves as a visceral, raw, and often haunting mirror for neurodivergent emotion, especially when considered through the lens of trauma, identity, and expression. Music is often called a universal language, but for many autistic and neurodivergent individuals, it is far more than that. It becomes a lifeline, a bridge where traditional communication often fails, where words can feel clumsy or insufficient. Music offers metaphor, nuance, and emotional clarity. This deep dive into Sleep Token isn't just about the music itself, but more about what it represents, how the band's rich, symbolic soundscape resonate on a deeply personal level for those who experience the world differently, through metaphor-laden lyrics, dynamic compositions, and emotionally charged performances. Sleep Token becomes more than a band. It becomes a voice for the internal worlds that often go unheard. For me, that voice, found within the music of this band, has become a mirror to the parts of myself that I have never been able to articulate. Their sounds are layered with metaphor, vulnerability, and catharsis, echoing the complexities of neurodivergent identity, trauma, isolation, and the longing for connection. It's not just music that I listen to, it's music I feel in my bones. Each track speaks to the tension between chaos and calm, the weight of unspoken grief, and the quiet hope buried beneath emotional numbness. In this deep dive, I'll explore how Sleep Token's music intertwines with my own lived experiences, how it captures things I've never had the words to say, and why it has become one of the most powerful forms of expression in my world. If you've ever felt like your emotions were too big for words, if music has ever said the things you couldn't, or if you've experienced the deep dive complexities of abusive relationships and trauma bonding, this one might be for you. We're going to talk about vessel, sleep, worship, grief, and everything in between. For those of you who have had to endure shifts with me where I force you to listen to Sleep Token all day on repeat, maybe this episode might serve an answer as to why. Let's get into it. Sleep Token's music is enveloped in an enigmatic lore centered on Vessel, the masked frontman, and his worship of an ancient deity known as Sleep. Beneath the mystique, many fans interpret the narrative as a toxic relationship between Vessel and Sleep, with Sleep acting as an abusive, narcissistic partner and Vessel as the trauma-bonded victim. Across 3 full-length albums, Sundowning in 2019, This Place Will Become Your Tomb in 2021, and Take Me Back to Eden in 2023, Sleep Token traces a harrowing emotional journey. Each song serves as a token of worship, chronicling the stages of emotional dependency, control, trauma bonding, and erosion of self-identity, as Vessel grapples with his devotion to sleep. I see aspects of my own story in each of these albums and each of these songs through the lens where I consider myself as Vessel, and each song as a token to my toxic abusive relationship and the narcissistic partner that I was so addicted upon, acting as Sleep. This podcast, this episode, offers a full lyrical and thematic analysis of the trilogy through that lens of narcissistic abuse, drawing on album lore, song-by-song breakdowns, psychological research, as well as fan interpretations. And we'll see how the albums together form a cohesive narrative reflecting classic patterns of narcissistic abuse. From idealization and love bombing to devaluation, despair, and the struggle for selfhood, and why these themes resonate so deeply with me and perhaps people like me. Sleep Token's debut album, Sundowning, drops us into the midst of Vessel's destructive worship of sleep. The songs read like an ongoing conversation between Vessel and his deity, exposing a relationship that is already abusive yet seemingly unavoidable. Vessel is caught in a push-pull of devotion and pain, aware that the relationship is breaking down but feeling powerless to escape. Many lyrics here illustrate emotional dependency, the intoxicating lure of sleep's power, and the early signs of a trauma bond taking hold. As the opening track, The Night Does Not Belong to God, sets a reverent yet foreboding tone. On the surface, it plays like a prayer, praising sleep's nocturnal domain. Vessel likens night and slumber to a paradise under sleep's rule. However, this praise conceals sleep's darker intentions. The night belongs to sleep, who is no benevolent God, but a selfish entity following their own rules. In narcissistic terms, sleep immediately establishes control. She isolates Vessel in darkness and offers a blissful escape only on her terms. Sleep deceives Vessel with a false taste of divinity, essentially love bombing him with paradise to make Vessel a dependent servant. This mirrors the idealization phase of narcissistic abuse, where the abuser showers the victim with affection and promises of salvation. Vessel is drawn in, experiencing confusion akin to the neurological sundowning phenomenon, heightened disorientation at dusk. In other words, Vessel is already losing his clarity and sense of reality under sleep's influence. In track 2, The Offering, Vessel plunges deeper into sleep's grasp. This track depicts Vessel willingly sacrificing himself. He offers his very being as sustenance for sleep to take a bite. Amidst a tumult of heavy riffs and desperate piano interludes, the tone shifts between holy devotion and resentful snarls, reflecting the conflict within Vessel's heart. By this point, what once felt like worshipful love has become parasitic. Vessel's devotion is consuming him as sleep hungrily takes control. The lyrics suggest the relationship has devolved. Quote, worship once seemed to offer salvation, yet the relationship has devolved into something parasitical. Vessel's loyalty is now one-sided. If nothing's changed, his loyalty to his God could consume him entirely. In an abusive dynamic, this is the stage where the victim starts to feel drained and trapped as the abuser's true controlling nature surfaces. Vessel's act of self-offering also highlights trauma bonding. Despite the pain, he seeks to prove his devotion in hopes of earning back sleep's love. It's the mindset of, if I give more of myself, maybe I'll regain their affection. And this is a common theme in victims of narcissistic abuse. But not all of Sundown focuses solely on the deity. In Levitate, Vessel reflects on a lost human love, revealing how inadequacy and abandonment primed him for sleep's control. Over soft piano, Vessel mourns an ex-lover he felt unworthy of. He believes she has angels and a place in heaven, while he is earthbound and unworthy. He was ashamed, feeling like an anchor dragging her down. This breakup left Vessel hollow and desperate for purpose. He needed to fill the void with a new obsession. Enter sleep. Here we see emotional dependency in its raw form. Vessel suffering from low self-esteem and loss of identity after a failed relationship clings to sleep as a new source of meaning. Psychologically, narcissistic abusers often prey on vulnerability. Sleep offers what Vessel craves: validation, and a sense of worth, making Vessel an easy target for manipulation. Trauma from the past, feeling unlovable, feeds his trauma bond with sleep, as he believes only sleep can levitate him out of this despair.
Where I was raised, there wasn't no street light, just pitch black and passing headlights.
Dark Signs delves into Vessel's complex past relationships and the red flags that he's ignored. The title itself suggests ominous warnings. In the lyrics, Vessel notes he missed the pitch black omens and alarm bells while chasing his ex. The result was a toxic breakup that left him shattered. His former partner now wishes she'd forget she knows them. And Vessel laments, "I miss the man I was. I hate who I have become." This admission is crucial. Vessel has lost his self-identity, loathing the person that he is post-breakup. Such identity erosion is a hallmark of abusive relationships, where victims often feel like they lost their old self whilst trying to appease someone new. The song even contains a subtle foreshadowing, references to marks on the dashboard, hints at a car crash narrative that will reappear in Take Me Back to Eden's Granite. Thematically, Dark Signs ties the trauma of past love to the present story. Vessel's unresolved wounds make him susceptible to the repeating cycle of abuse with sleep. He's doomed to repeat the same tale in his devotion to sleep. As one analysis puts it, this is a pattern seen in codependency and trauma bonds. Without healing, one unconsciously seeks familiar pain, rationalizing it as love. In Higher, Vessel blurs the line between pain and pleasure, hinting that he might even be addicted to the turmoil. The music shifts between dreamy calm and furious heaviness, mirroring how violence and ecstasy intertwine in Vessel's life. He even admits we just can't resist the violence, suggesting a lust for pain. It's ambiguous whether Vessel truly wants to escape the cycle or part of him now craves it. Lyrically, Higher nods towards Vessel's obligation to sleep, referencing how sleep needs a melody to repay a debt that Vessel owes. This implies that Vessel's suffering and song offerings are a payment, a classic symptom of trauma bonding where the victim feels indebted to the abuser for the love once given or promised. The title Higher and talk of being unable to resist violence also reflects the chemical high of abuse. The brain's reward pathways can become hooked on the intermittent affection amid pain, much like a drug. Vessel is essentially confessing that both he and sleep are locked in a violent dance they just can't resist, embodying the compulsive nature of an abusive bond. Take Aim paints Vessel as prey in a deadly game of love. The song's gentle, lovesick atmosphere belies a predatory theme. Vessel feels constantly in the crosshairs, at the mercy of a lover who is a hunter ready to shoot. He describes love's sting as lethal as weapons, and his desperation to please makes him hate himself. Despite the torment, he longs for this brutality. If love is pain, then sleep's intoxicatingly cruel autocracy is the height of affection. These lyrics lay bare the masochist dependency that Vessel has developed. Pain has become intertwined with love to the point that he equates cruelty with care. This is a direct parallel to trauma-bonded victims who over time normalize, sometimes even eroticize, the abuse. Love stings and I crave it anyway. Vessel's identity is further eroded as he internalizes blame, hating himself, and finds twisted comfort in being the victim, prey, because it means he is at least noticed by his God. This dynamic is a textbook example of control. Sleep, the hunter, keeps Vessel perpetually on edge, reinforcing who holds the power. The next track, Give, whilst most of Sundowning is from Vessel's perspective, Give intriguingly hands the microphone to Sleep. In this track, Sleep's voice, through Vessel, coaxes and commands. Over a tempting backdrop of high, delicate vocals and soft percussion, Sleep promises to watch over Vessel and shield him from enemies, but only if Vessel surrenders completely. The repeated plea for Vessel to give in to Sleep's demands. This is coercive control in action. The abuser offers protection and love, but only in exchange for obedience, and the victim's abdication of self. Sleep's vow of "I will be there for you" is a classic manipulator's line. Offering safety that isolates the victim from others and binds them tighter to the abuser. By urging Vessel to embrace his dark impulses and trust Sleep alone, Sleep encourages Vessel to sever other attachments and moral qualms. At its core, Give is the voice of gaslighting and grooming. Sleep frames submission as salvation. For Vessel, desperate not to feel alone, this promise is irresistible. He is being conditioned to believe that only through total compliance can he find love and safety, setting the stage for deeper abuse. If Give was intended as seductive, then Gods is an explosion of rage. This track follows immediately after Vessel submits, and we witness the result. Vessel is transformed, perhaps even briefly possessed by Sleep's power, and he becomes fearsome, such that even the old gods avert their gaze from him. Musically and lyrically, Gods is ferocious. Vessel's vocals turn from soft crooning to raw, rampaging howls. This can be interpreted as Vessel channeling Sleep's wrath, or as Vessel himself lashing out at Sleep. The line between the two is blurred. He could be rebuking the god for luring him down a dark path, or demonstrating how Sleep's influence has made him monstrous. Either way, Gods highlights the identity distortion inherent in abuse. Vessel turns into someone quite violent when he surrenders to obsession. He becomes unrecognizable even to himself, capable of extremes to please or protest his god. This corresponds to how victims in abusive relationships may act out in uncharacteristic ways under extreme stress or manipulation. The anger in Gods is an important emotional vent in the album's arc. It shows Vessel struggling against Sleep's control, momentarily furious at what he's become. Yet, as the next songs show, the fight is short-lived. After the venom of Gods, Sundowning takes a dark turn inwards with Sugar. The track's bewitching synth and sensual groove underscore a disturbing confession. Vessel has developed a taste for the pain of this toxic partnership. He describes being addicted to the chains that bind him. Whether literal or metaphorical, this marks the full onset of trauma bonding. Vessel is fully consumed by the control he once resisted. In psychological terms, he has been conditioned to associate pain with love, and he now craves the very abuse that hurts him. The sharp contrast to his rebellion in Gods is telling. After venting anger, he swings back to submission, perhaps through fear of losing Sleep. Indeed, Sugar suggests Vessel has realized it's easier not to fight. The song portrays the learned helplessness of abuse. Resistance gave way to resignation, and now he copes by finding sweetness in suffering. The title, Sugar, itself is ironic. A flavor of pleasure derived from something harmful like a poison coated in sweetness. Vessel's dependency has reached a point where the chains feel comforting. This is the dangerous hook of trauma bonds, the intermittent rewards, the sugar, They keep him tied even tighter to sleep, despite the damage. Say That You Will returns to the vulnerability and reveals how deeply violence and love have intertwined in Vessel's psyche. He reflects on his past romance again, recalling that it was filled with both sorrow and blood. The imagery of the impulse to love and the instinct to kill becoming entangled in that relationship is striking. Vessel admits he made loving his partner a blood sport. Love became a fierce, damaging competition. This acknowledgement of his own role in the toxicity shows flickers of self-awareness. He recognizes the pattern of violence that he's both suffered and perpetuated. In the context of sleep, it's a grim foreshadowing. Violent delights often have violent ends, and unfortunately for Vessel, he's destined to have another violent relationship with sleep. The phrase, "say that you will," itself sounds like a plea for commitment. Vessel is begging either his past lover or sleep, or both, to promise they'll stay. It's the voice of someone so broken that even a violent love is better than none. We see how emotional dependency warps Vessel's sense of a healthy relationship. He's addicted to the violence of love, doomed to repeat the cycle. This track lays bare the trauma cycle. Vessel is aware of it, yet feels unable to change it, which is common in abuse survivors who haven't yet found a way out. In Drag Me Under, Vessel finally admits defeat. This song is hypnotic and gentle, almost like a lullaby laced with surrender. Its serene pianos and angelic falsetto convey an eerie peace as Vessel asks to be pulled down once more. After struggling through anger and addiction, here he sounds exhausted, choosing capitulation over conflict. Vessel implores sleep, or perhaps any lover, to drag me under again. No matter how bruised he gets, it's a heart-rendering illustration of trauma bonding and low self-worth. He now believes any love is good enough, even one that drowns him. The imagery of sinking or going underwater recurs, connecting to the idea of being pulled into sleep's realm, the subconscious dream world, or literally drowning in sorrow. In narrative context, this song plunges underwater at the end, segueing into the next album's aquatic theme. Thematically, Drag Me Under is the submission stage, analogous to the discard in narcissistic abuse cycles, where the victim stops fighting back. Vessel's individual will is nearly gone. He exists to be taken by sleep. This complete erosion of self is the culmination of abuse throughout Sundowning. This track's gentle suggestion, a numb acceptance. Vessel equates peace with giving up resistance entirely.
I made loving you a blood sport. I made loving you a blood sport. I made loving you a blood sport. I can't win.
Bloodsport closes the standard edition of Sundowning as a final poem of regret and heartbreak. Vessel mourns his lost human love, wishing he could be forgiven and have her back. He acknowledges his mistakes. Clearly here, he is the one who made loving her a blood sport, implying he contributed to the relationship's destruction. This song is devoid of sleep's presence. It's purely Vessel grappling with guilt and loss. In terms of self-identity, this is perhaps the most honest we see Vessel on this album. Stripped of rage, obsession, or mystical language, he's just a broken man longing for what he lost. The lesson, however, is bleak. Vessel recognizes that his violent delights led to a violent end, and that pattern is destined to repeat itself with sleep. Bloodsport ties together the album's message that Vessel's concept of love is inseparable from pain and violence, and thus he is fated to serve a violent relationship with the deity he now serves. The remorse here foreshadows the cyclical nature of abuse. Even after one destructive relationship ends, the trauma may carry forward into the next, which in Vessel's case is the eternal bond with sleep. It is worth mentioning here that Sundowning's deluxe edition adds Shelter, a stripped-down ballad where Vessel nostalgically revisits memories and entertains the fleeting what-if fantasies about doing things differently. Shelter shows he is still deeply lovesick and longing for a second chance, indicating that even as he submits to sleep, a part of him is stuck in the past, seeking the closure that he never truly got. In summary, Sundowning introduces a relationship defined by idolization turned obsession. Vessel cycles through devotion, doubt, anger, resignation, and regret, the full turbulent rage of someone in an abusive entanglement. Sleep looms as a mostly unseen presence, the addicting lover who gives Vessel fleeting highs, divine nights, comfort in dreams, and crushing lows, pain, loss of self. By the album's end, Vessel is trauma bonded, hopelessly attached to sleep. Despite recognizing the damage, he has effectively sacrificed his identity at the altar of this narcissistic entity, setting the stage for the next chapter of the saga. Sleep Token's second album, This Place Will Become Your Tomb, often abbreviated as TPWBYT, serves as both a sequel and a prequel in the Law's chronology. While Sundowning showed an established toxic bond, this album rewinds to the origin of Vessel's pact with sleep, charting the events that led him to give himself over. The album is drenched in water imagery. Each track was even associated with a specific ocean depth in its marketing, symbolizing Vessel's descent physically, a drowning motif, and mentally sinking into sleep's control. Over the course of the album, Vessel moves from despair and suicidality to encountering sleep, to gradually relinquishing his autonomy. The themes of control and self-identity are central. We witness sleep's manipulations intensify, Vessel's trauma bonds solidify, and ultimately Vessel's mind becoming a tomb, a hollow vessel for sleep. Atlantic opens the album with a scene of utter despair. It takes us back to where it all started, underwater. This song is often interpreted as Vessel's aftermath of a failed suicide attempt. We find him at the water's edge, or metaphorically submerged, essentially ready to die. The gentle piano and swelling emotion accompany lyrics of Vessel begging for the ocean's blue light to take his life. This blue light could be literal, moonlight under the waves, or figurative, as blue lights are used to deter intravenous drug use, a subtle reference to self-harm or slow self-destruction. In Atlantic, Vessel is empty, just orbiting the vacuum I am without sleep. He chooses murder over suicide, meaning he sees killing his old self, surrendering identity, as preferable to killing his body. This chilling line shows Vessel's mindset. He would rather erase who he is, murder his identity and will, in service of sleep, than face life alone or end it outright. Indeed, the end of Atlantic implies that at the brink of death, Vessel encounters sleep as a saviour, a god reaching out in that liminal space between life and death. Narratively, this is the critical moment of vulnerability, where the narcissistic abuser sweeps in. Vessel is broken. He's ready to grasp at anything to stop the pain, and sleep offers exactly that. A chance to forget, to have purpose. In psychological terms, Vessel's suicidality and hopelessness makes him extremely susceptible to trauma bonding. Any kindness or meaning offered at this point will hook him deeply, a fact not lost on an opportunist entity like sleep. In Hypnosis, we witness Vessel's first full encounter with sleep. The song crashes in with heavier, darker tones, mirroring the overwhelming presence of the deity. The title and the music evoke a trance, as if Vessel is being literally hypnotized. Sleep seduces Vessel, inducing a state of amnesia or surrender. Notably, the name references Hypnos, the Greek god of sleep who could erase memories with the water of Lethe. This aligns with the theme. Vessel begs sleep to take everything, to wipe away his pain and past. This is a poignant illustration of escape through oblivion. From a trauma perspective, Vessel is consenting to a kind of mental erasure, a dissociation from trauma which abusers can exploit by offering a fantasy or an addictive distraction. Hypnosis can be seen as the formal deal or baptism. Vessel yields to sleep's power in exchange for not feeling anything. The parallel with the offering from Sundowning is explicit. The melodies even mirror each other. One analysis notes the lyrics between the two songs show opposite sides of a give and a take. In Hypnosis, Vessel pleads, "Lift me out, take everything," whereas in The Offering, he cried, "Sink your teeth, just give me all." This inversion highlights how the dynamic has flipped. Now it's Vessel begging to be taken rather than offering himself actively. It underscores that after Atlantic, Vessel's will has been shattered. He just wants sleep to consume him and numb his doubts. From Sleep's vantage, this is the ultimate control, a victim voluntarily giving up their mind. On Mine, the boundaries between Vessel and Sleep begin to blur. This track suggests Sleep speaking through Vessel, or at least Sleep's perspective dominating. The opening feels tender and romantic, but it swells into a grandiose declaration of possession. The repeated refrain, "You will be mine," leaves no doubt. Sleep views Vessel not as an equal partner, but as property to manipulate, consume, and control. This is classic narcissistic entitlement, the abuser staking claim over the victim's life. We also learn that Sleep had been paralyzed until finding this perfect Vessel, implying Sleep needs Vessel, a hint of how the narcissistic needs someone to control to feel powerful, sometimes called narcissistic supply. The track's structure itself is telling. It starts like a love song, but ends in ominous insistence, reflecting how love bombing transitions into possessiveness. By the climax, any illusion of equality is gone. Vessel has effectively been told his purpose is to belong to Sleep. One interpretation even reads the finale as deliberately manipulative. Mine sounds big and sweet on the surface, as if a loving pledge. Underneath, it's about eroding Vessel's agency. The song's end reprises the opening lines in a darker musical tone, symbolizing how what began as a seemingly mutual affection becomes an inescapable trap. Vessel is now tangled for good. The word tangled appears repeatedly in Sleep Token's lyrics, tangled in Sleep's web, to emphasize how obsessive and inescapable this bond is. Mine is essentially the collaring of Vessel. He's marked as Sleep's own, reinforcing the loss of self-identity as he transforms purely into Vessel, a container for Sleep's will. The next song, Like That, reveals the album's title and concept in its lyrics, delivering a stark metaphor. Vessel survived drowning, but now the ocean is his tomb. He's trapped under the surface, permanently, ever since he first submitted to Sleep beneath the waves. In other words, the place where he nearly died and met Sleep has become the place his autonomy died. Hence, this place will become your tomb. The water here represents the death of Vessel's independence. For the first time, we see Vessel feeling a flicker of resentment. He is aware that he's frozen in this submerged world, forced to fulfill Sleep's wishes. Like that is a moment of lucidity for Vessel, recognizing that from the moment he said yes to Sleep, a part of him was buried. The imagery of entrapment is strong. His life above water in the normal world is over. This realization that his life is not his own is a key aspect of psychological abuse. Victims often described like feeling like they're walking on eggshells or living in a reality constructed by their abuser. Vessel's world now is literally under Sleep's surface. The anger in like that, the first flicker of Vessel's resentment, indicates he dimly perceives the loss of his freedom. Yet, because he remains under Sleep's influence, this anger doesn't yet lead to escape. It just simmers as bitterness. The track is a note in the narrative where Vessel internally protests, "I am stuck like this because of you," acknowledging the death of his old self, his tomb.
I'm still full of the love you want, still waking up beneath it all. And I'm still full of the love you want. I'll reach for you, unafraid alone.
Descending deeper, The Love You Want plays out like a lush piano ballad, but it conceals a painful lesson. As Vessel sinks physically further underwater, he also sinks into his subconsciousness, reliving memories even as sleep begins to wipe them away. This song highlights a profound imbalance of power, from Vessel's past relationship mirroring what's happening with sleep. Vessel reflects where he felt he had to change himself to be loved, bending to another's desires to earn affection. This is the core of codependency, sacrificing one's own needs and identity to satisfy a partner. It's implied that his ex-lover never gave him the love he desperately sought, and tragically, he's repeating this pattern with Sleep. The chorus can be read as Vessel promising Sleep, "I'll be whatever you want, I'll meet your standards if you just give me love." In a narcissistic relationship, this is exactly what the abuser conditions the victim to believe. You are unlovable unless you become what I demand. The music's euphoric feel contrasts the dark truth. Vessel is giving up pieces of himself, convinced that changing is the only way not to be abandoned. Self-identity issues are blatant here. Vessel's sense of self-worth is so low that pleasuring the other is his only mission. One analysis puts it, Vessel is left thinking he has to change to be loved, even if it is detrimental to him. This realization is heartbreaking, and it resonates strongly with the survivors of abuse, who often internalize the belief that they are the problem, and it is not their abuser's unreasonable demands. Fall for Me is one of the album's most unique tracks, featuring heavily processed polyphonic vocals that sound like a chorus of fragmented voices. These are often interpreted as Sleep's voice directly addressing Vessel, urging him to fall for the deity completely. Essentially, Sleep is saying, "Devote yourself to me forever." The use of eerie, artificial vocal effects suggests Sleep's inhumane or concealed nature. She hides vulnerability behind a digital veil. Yet interestingly, in the song's music video, the raw truth flashes as text on screen, presumably from Sleep's perspective. "I am inadequate. I am lost. I am no good." This is a rare peek behind the narcissist's mask. It implies that Sleep needs Vessel to bolster her own power and ego. She needs Vessel to spread her message. each song a token to entice worshippers. In terms of narcissistic abuse, this is the concept of the abuser's hidden insecurity. Grandiose narcissists often cover a fragile self. Sleep admitting I am no god, even as she demands worship, is a striking example of a vulnerable narcissist's plea. She's effectively saying, I'm nothing without you, so fall for me and serve me. This tactic can be seen as emotional blackmail. The abuser shows weakness to pull the victim back in, sometimes a pity play. In context, it cements Vessel's commitment. He pities Sleep, or he feels uniquely responsible for Sleep's sense of worth. By the end, Vessel is indeed prepared to be submerged together with Sleep, as the video's hidden text suggests. Fall for Me is thus a keystone of the trauma bond. Sleep appeals to Vessel's empathy and fear of abandonment, ensuring Vessel's total commitment. Their fates entwine, a living drama of shared pain, with Vessel willingly drowning in devotion if it means neither of them will be alone.
Let's talk about chemistry, frozen dynamics and melt through till the heart of the molecules, till the particles fall like holy water.
In Alkaline, Vessel explores how love itself has left him permanently altered, almost chemically changed. The track uses chemical imagery throughout, painting love as an acid that corrodes. An alkaline substance typically neutralizes acid, but here it seems love's toxicity has upset Vessel's inner balance. He notes that the effect of toxic affection has left him altered forever. This reflects the long-term impact of narcissistic abuse. Victims often describe never being the same, as if the abuse changed their very chemistry. Indeed, trauma could change brain chemistry and one's outlook on love. The song underscores the idea of consumption. Love eats away at Vessel, bit by bit. References to tasting new flesh from an earlier song called Jericho, and being literally consumed, which will come in the next album's Vor, tie into a motif that loving Vessel equates to devouring him. Narcissistic partners often metaphorically consume their victims' time, energy, and identity for their own gratification. Vessel here recognizes that pattern. He gives and gives until nothing is left, leaving him chemically different, perhaps numb or hardened. The title itself, Alkaline, could imply that Vessel is searching for a way to neutralize the acid of his past experiences, but failing. The corrosive force of love and obsession remains, emphasizing that the trauma bond has seeped into his very being, changing who he is at a molecular level. In a sense, Vessel is describing the symptoms of CPTSD, complex trauma, feeling fundamentally changed and damaged by sustained abuse. The next song, Distraction, marks perhaps my favourite 5-track run in any album ever made. Distraction has a resigned, dreamy quality to it, signalling that Vessel is now drifting deeper into Sleep's realm. Lyrically, it sounds like Vessel succumbing to defeat. It's too late for me, he confesses, as his voice itself seems to sink into the song's depths. The music is gentle yet powerful, mirroring the mixed emotions, a relief in surrender and a sorrow in it. Vessel calls Sleep his distraction, implying that giving in to Sleep spares him from facing reality or his past pain. However, he simultaneously knows this choice is irreversible. Embracing Sleep will forever change him, and he won't be able to return to his old life. This track epitomizes ambivalence in abusive relationships. The victim finds solace in the abuser, distraction from the loneliness or trauma, even while understanding that staying will destroy who they were. The phrase, "it's too late for me," is heart-wrenching, Vessel believes escape or recovery is beyond reach, a common feeling in those deeply trauma bonded. By now, sleep's control is nearly absolute. Vessel welcoming the change suggests a form of identification with the aggressor. He'd rather join with the abusive force than continue the internal battle. It's a psychological survival tactic. By aligning completely with sleep, Vessel avoids the pain of resistance. Distraction portrays that moment of capitulation where the mind prioritizes short-term comfort, however twisted, over the terrifying prospect of freedom. In real terms, Vessel is giving up on his former self and any outside attachments, focusing on the all-consuming presence of sleep. In Descending, something intriguing happens. Vessel exhibits a spark of arrogance and power within the relationship. Over a dark, pulsating beat with a hint of nightclub swagger, he acknowledged that he does hold one card. Without a Vessel, sleep is powerless. Essentially, if Vessel didn't exist to worship and spread sleep's message, sleep would remain a forgotten deity. This can be seen as Vessel's subtle attempt to rebalance the power dynamic. He taunts or challenges sleep, "You will always come crawling back to me," and urges, "Come on and save me," almost mocking sleep's need to prove her power. This is a bold attitude we haven't seen since perhaps the anger in Gods. It might represent Vessel's inner psyche fighting back, or even illusion of empowerment given by sleep to keep Vessel engaged. In narcissistic abuse cycles, there are moments when the victim tries to reclaim agency, pointing out the abuser's dependence on them. However, these moments are often fleeting or dangerous. Here, Vessel's tone could also be interpreted as influenced by sleep. Perhaps sleep speaking through Vessel to remind him that both are bound together. Regardless, Descending carries a flair of defiance. The title suggests that even as Vessel continues sinking, or descending, into the abyss, he is not doing so completely passively. He's bargaining for some recognition of his role. It's as if he's saying, "If I am to be your Vessel, at least admit that you need me." This is a psychologically complex part of trauma bonding. The victim derives a sense of identity or purpose from being needed by the abuser. For example, "They can't live without me either." It can create a twisted loyalty. By framing himself as indispensable, Vessel clings to a shred of self-worth. Descending, in sum, highlights the codependent facet of their bond. Two sides stuck in a loop, each needing the other in different ways as they sink together. Telomeres is a fascinating moment where Vessel and sleep seem to speak almost as equals, sharing a unified vision. In the lore, telomeres are end caps of chromosomes relating to aging and decay, symbolically touching on time, mortality, and the end of things. The song's soothing sound conveys a sense of safety and new beginning. "You guide me into safety. This is the start of something." It captures the exact moment that sleep intervened in Vessel's suicide attempt, turning his descent into a meeting of souls. The atmosphere is intimate and symbiotic. For once, Vessel isn't begging, or sleep isn't commanding. Instead, there is a calm dialogue. The eye of the storm. This could represent the honeymoon phase of the abuse cycle. Right after the victim capitulates, and perhaps after a turbulent episode, the abuser showers them with warmth to make them feel secure again. Vessel feels guided to safety, as if sleep's embrace is gentle and protective here. The lyric, "This is the start of something," carries hope. It's the emotional high that reinforces the trauma bond. Those moments when the abusive partner seems loving, making the victim believe in the relationship's potential again. Telomeres being a rare equal footing conversation suggests that by this point Vessel is so merged with sleep that he perceives their voice as one, or at least aligned. It's a consolation. After all the pain, sleep gives him a vision of meaning, that together they are beginning a something, a mission, a destiny. In psychological terms, this is the intermittent reward that prevents Vessel from leaving. He's convinced that the union with sleep is ultimately benevolent at its core, despite all the evidence of its toxicity.
All the time being, you are still a perfect reminder of all of these scars on my arm.
By high water, Vessel takes one last look at the life he's abandoning. Suspended in the watery depths, he confronts the memory of his past lover and their toxic relationship. He acknowledges the truth: you'll never bear the weight of two, meaning his ex could never carry both her emotional burden and his. A frank admission that their relationship was unhealthy. He also admits he must stop pretending they could ever be together. This reflection is significant. It shows Vessel finally letting go of his past human love, which has been haunting him. By burying that history, he is effectively giving himself permission to fully embrace his new existence with sleep. The scars on his arms and soul from that prior love are noted. He knows how damaged he was by it. In a way, high water is Vessel's closure with his old self. It's bittersweet because it's also an acceptance that he's moving into a possibly darker fate. But at least he's not held by that old hope anymore. He waves off his past and welcomes his new era of holy allegiance to sleep. Psychologically, this could be seen as Vessel rationalizing his choice. I've been hurt before by normal love. I can't go back, so I might as well dedicate myself to this God who promises to take away my pain. It's a tragic justification, but a common one for trauma survivors who choose seemingly extreme paths after abuse, like joining a cult, adopting a radical belief, or in Vessel's case, a literal cult of one deity. The title High Water can imply the peak of the flood. Vessel's old life is submerged. He's reached the point of no return. By processing his previous trauma here, he clears the last attachment that isn't sleep. It's the final emotional preparation to be entirely sleep's vessel. Missing Limbs is the haunting finale of This Place Will Be Your Tomb. Stripped down to acoustic guitar and intimate vocals, it's the sound of hitting rock bottom, which is fitting since the album's depth coordinates for this song correspond to the Challenger Deep, the ocean's deepest point. Vessel's voice is raw and close, as if he is in the same room with us, unmasked. In this stark arrangement, we essentially hear the human behind Vessel, perhaps for the first time. It feels like plain honesty. He's using the metaphor of phantom limb syndrome for heartbreak, losing someone who felt like a part of him. He will feel their presence even when they're gone, manifesting in pain as phantom limb syndrome does. It's a beautiful yet painful analogy to the lingering pain of lost love, and one can interpret that the lost limb could be his ex, or even his own self that he sacrificed. He acknowledges that letting go is necessary, as the person he loved professed love but didn't act with love. Their convictions didn't really match. This directly echoes a common scenario in narcissistic abuse. The abuser's words say "I love you," but their actions betray hurt, forcing the victim to finally see the truth and attempt to leave. Vessel sees he must sever the connection even though it will leave him with phantom pain. The lyrics also imply he wishes he didn't care so much, because remembering is painful. Ultimately, Vessel resigns to cutting himself free of his emotions. He cannot bear to feel anymore. The only way he finds to do that is to settle for someone that he can have, sleep. This is the heartbreaking resolution. Vessel gives himself fully to sleep, not out of love, but because reality hurts too much. Sleep will take away his pain in exchange for total devotion. By the end of the song, in the narrative, sleep fully embodies Vessel. The last lines shift perspective from what they did before to what I did before, indicating Vessel has lost distinction between himself and the god. The album ends with an ominous electric hum swallowing the acoustic sound, as if sleep's presence engulfs Vessel's remaining consciousness. Missing Limbs concludes the cycle of abuse on a note of hollow surrender. Vessel is now essentially a carcass for sleep, an empty shell that houses the deity. His identity, love, and humanity are entombed in the deep along with his pain.
And I live like you're gone missing limbs for you.
In This Place Will Be Your Tomb, we witness the full process of Vessel's psychological breakdown and loss of self under sleep's narcissistic abuse. From suicidal hopelessness to being preyed upon, from initial seduction to total submission, with brief flickers of resistance, drowned by wave after wave of manipulation. It's a chronicle of trauma bonding in extreme form. Vessel repeatedly chooses oblivion over pain until there is nothing left of himself. By the album's end, Vessel has effectively dissociated from his trauma by allowing sleep to subsume him. The tomb in the album title is metaphorically Vessel's own mind and body, now a crypt where his former self lies buried while sleep wears him like a suit. This sets up the final chapter, where we explore the aftermath of such complete control and whether any hope of breaking this cycle remains. If you are familiar with me or my story and the people within it, the themes of this album resonate with my core. I'll leave it up to you to decide who might be sleep and who might be previous lovers. But as you can see, the metaphors in this album tie directly into my own lived experiences. Take Me Back to Eden, Sleep Token's third album, serves as the capstone of the trilogy, a climactic journey through destruction and yearning for rebirth. By this point in the lore, Vessel is fully enthralled to sleep, essentially living as her avatar. This album explores themes of repetitive cycles, both in relationships and across lifetimes, the allure of addiction and self-destruction, glimmers of self-awareness and autonomy fighting to the surface. The phrase "take me back to Eden" evokes itself a longing to return to an idyllic state, perhaps a time before trauma, or a spiritual reunion. But in the context of narcissistic abusive bond, Eden could be the idealized beginning of the relationship, the love bombing phase that the victim keeps hoping to recapture. Throughout the album, lyrical motifs from previous records recur, reinforcing the idea that Vessel is stuck in a loop, the cycle of abuse that may be fated to repeat unless he can break free. Fans have described this trilogy as the trilogy of trauma, with this final part confronting the possibility or ending of the perpetual cycle.
When we were made.
The opener, Chokehold, immediately re-establishes the relationship dynamic with visceral imagery. As the title suggests, it's about a love that has turned suffocating and violent. The song centers on a relationship that seemed perfect but has gone bad. resonating with the patterns we've seen before. The twist here is it's interpretive. It might be sleep warning Vessel, showing him a vision that any human relationship he tries will end up choking him, thus driving Vessel back into Sleep's arms out of fear. Sleep offers salvation from a cycle of destruction she has seen before, as if saying, "Don't you see, this was destined, only I can save you from it." Indeed, the first line, "When we were made, it was no accident," is repeated like a prophecy of fate. Narcissistic abusers often foster a sense of inevitability or soulmate destiny to trap their victims. We were meant to be. Here, Sleep leverages that, whether referring to Vessel and another lover or Vessel and Sleep themselves. The message is that Vessel's suffering was pre-written, and the only answer is submission to Sleep's plan. On a meta level, a fan on the Sleep Token Discord noted that chokehold feels like the state of being living with another person and living without them. They feel that they can do neither, but must choose one. That's the essence of a trauma bond, feeling like you can't live with or without your abuser. Vessel, at this juncture, is suspended in that painful in-between, taking a metaphorical breath after nearly drowning in "this place will be your tomb," and now grappling with the cycle beginning anew or breaking. Chokehold thus kicks off the album with the stark reality of where Vessel stands ensnared, struggling for air and confronted with the same choice as always: return to the abusive comfort of sleep or face the unknown alone. As one of Sleep Token's most sonically eclectic tracks, famous for its viral R&B meets metal breakdown, the bit I refer to as baby-making music, The Summoning continues the theme of cycles and repeated patterns. It explicitly threads back lyrical motifs from earlier albums. For instance, "I look for scarlet and you look for ultraviolet," echoing lines from Sundowning's Higher. Likewise, a line about a blood trail, red in the blue, mirrors that imagery and connects to a lyric on this album's Aqua Regia. This self-referencing reinforces that Vessel is caught in repetitive loops, emotionally and narratively. The Summoning's lyrics depict a meeting, or summoning, of two people that might be a prelude to tragedy, as fans suspect. It hints that even new connections Vessel tries to form are doomed to the same collapse as before, perhaps because sleep won't allow him genuine happiness elsewhere. The presence of colour imagery, scarlet versus ultraviolet, red versus blue, often symbolises contrasting perspectives or states of being, probably Vessel's reality versus sleep's illusion. Some have theorised this track is describing Vessel meeting someone new, with sleep ominously suggesting it will end like the rest. The title, The Summoning, could literally refer to sleep summoning Vessel back after Vessel's momentary attempt at an independent connection, or to Vessel inadvertently summoning his traumas whenever he tries to love again. Psychologically, it portrays the effect of unresolved trauma. One is drawn repeatedly into familiar dynamics, summoned by old patterns. In short, The Summoning situates the album's conflict. Vessel yearns for normal love and freedom, but the gravitational pull of sleep and the trauma cycle drags him back. The track's popularity might also lie in how it captures the chaos of that push-pull, musically wild swings reflecting the turbulent emotional swings of an abusive cycle. Granite stands out as a more narrative song, seemingly describing a car crash and its aftermath. The metaphor of a crash aligns with self-destruction or hitting rock bottom. Fans interpret it as possibly caused by addiction or reckless behaviour. In the law context, it could tie back to the marks on the dashboard mentioned in Sundowning's Dark Signs, suggesting Vessel indeed experienced a literal destructive event in his past. The lyrics contrast sulfur with granite, which one theory explains as a chemical reaction. Sulfur dioxide can cause granite to degrade. Symbolically, if Vessel is granite, strong and grounded, then sulfur, toxic gas, often associated with hell, could be sleep's influence or Vessel's own toxic habits corroding him. This ties into the chemistry of abuse again, how a steady person can be eroded by poisonous influence over time. The presence of addiction hints, and it flows from the summoning, suggests that in trying to cope, Vessel might indulge in substantive or destructive tendencies, leading to literal accidents. It underlines how entrenched the trauma cycle is. It not only affects relationships, but then Vessel's entire life and choices. Granite, as a title, evokes hardness and permanence. Perhaps Vessel's hurt is solidified, or his fate set in stone. It could also hint at him being stubborn or resistant to change, thus repeating mistakes. In an abusive context, victims often find themselves in ruin, crashes or crises, as a culmination of trauma and poor coping, which further isolates them and makes them feel unworthy, driving them back to the abuser for false comfort. Thus, Granite can be seen as depicting one of Vessel's lowest moments in the cycle, reinforcing his belief that he is the flawed one who causes disaster, needing sleep's forgiveness or rescue afterwards. Named after the potent mixture of acids that can dissolve noble metals like gold, Aqua Regia continues with the chemical metaphors. The song features a lot of gold imagery and possibly references to drug use, tying it back to Granite. Aqua Regia literally means royal water and is known for dissolving gold, implying that something pure or precious is being corroded. Here, the precious thing could be Vessel's humanity or love being broken down by acidic influence, i.e. sleep or addiction. This song frames the romance as destructive yet addictive, the very definition of a trauma bond. Vessel acknowledges the relationship is toxic, but he can't let go because he's hooked. The line about drug abuse suggests that perhaps Vessel or his partner fell into substance use, again highlighting self-destructing coping mechanisms that parallel the abusive love. Aqua Regia depicts Vessel at his most human, flawed, hurting, craving relief, and simultaneously at his most damaged and broken. There is almost a resignation that he is beyond saving in a normal way. Only an extreme purification or dissolution can reset things. In essence, the song marries the idea of addiction to substances or love or pain. They all kind of blur together here, with the concept of being chemically dissolved. For an abuse survivor, this resonates as the feeling of being chemically addicted to their abuser. The brain's reward system treats intermittent affection like a drug. Withdrawal is excruciating. Vessel sees this cycle clearly. The romance is destructive and toxic, yet he cannot break it, illustrating how cognitive understanding alone often isn't enough to escape a trauma bond. The emotional addiction is overpowering. Vor marks the start of another 4-track run that I think can rival most albums. Perhaps the album's most overtly dark track, Vor, dives into one of Sleep Token's most unsettling metaphors, vorophilia. Not something I'd recommend Googling on a work computer. Vorophilia is the fetish of being consumed. The song's title literally means to devour. Lyrics depict an almost erotic desire to be eaten alive by someone or something. The imagery is both sexual and terrifying, perfectly capturing the duality of Vessel's relationship with sleep. On one hand, there is a twisted intimacy in the idea of being consumed, a literal, I want to become one with you. And on the other, it's the ultimate loss of self. The obvious sexual connotations reflect how sleep's domination and Vessel's submission have a seductive quality despite being fatal. But beyond kink imagery, Vore ties into themes of addiction and subsumption. Vessel's longing to disappear into something larger, to escape himself entirely by letting sleep devour him. The desperation here is palpable. This is attachment taken to lethal extremes. Interestingly, Vore also contains references to holy water from granite, maintaining the motif of cycles and religion. It's as if the same cycle of being baptized, holy water, and consumed repeats. Vessel at this point wants to be consumed, a sign of how deep the trauma bond runs. He equates consumption with love. This is the logical endgame of the narcissistic abuse, if taken to an extreme. The victim's ultimate fantasy, born from trauma, might be to cease existing as an independent being and be entirely absorbed by their abuser. It's chilling, but Vore expresses that level of codependency. I am nothing without you, so take all of me. In psychological terms, Vessel exhibits annihilation wish, a desire to destroy himself or suicidality twisted into the frame of devotion. Let my beloved be the one to destroy me. It's the self-destructive ideation repackaged as romance. And as a personal side note, if at this year's Download Festival you happen to see a medic standing in the pit screaming, "Are you in pain like I am?" at the top of his voice, maybe give me a wave, because that'll be me. By its title, Ascensionism suggests striving for a higher plane or form of spiritual elevation. This song can be read as a conversation between Vessel and sleep that is laden with ambiguity. It touches on ideas of past lives or past ties, possibly implying that Vessel's story has happened before, maybe with previous Vessels. This aligns with the album's cyclical themes, the notion of eternal recurrence, that these destructive patterns keep playing out. Lyrically, Ascensionism revisits the imagery from Vore, the summoning, and Aquaresia, further reinforcing that sense of looping and inescapability. What's interesting is the dual meaning. Is ascension for Vessel finding enlightenment or escape, or is it ironically for sleep ascending to power through Vessel's worship? The ambiguity itself might mirror how Vessel can't discern his own voice from sleep's influence anymore. If we view it as Vessel striving upwards, it could signal his attempt to rise above the despair, to ascend out of the cycle. If sleep is involved, it might be another trick, promising ascension like a cult promise of transcendence, while dragging Vessel back down in deception. The lyrics hint at inevitable destruction and deception as part of the relationship. So even in talk of ascension, there's an undercurrent that Vessel is being lied to or lying to himself. This track encapsulates the push-pull of hope versus doom. For a moment, one might think Vessel could break the pattern and ascend, but the weight of repeated references suggests destiny is stronger. In narcissistic abuse recovery, this is analogous to the stage where the victim oscillates between attempting to leave and being sucked back in by false promises or their own trauma-induced beliefs. Ascensionism might be that oscillation in musical form, reaching up for light, but being ensnared by shadowy hands. In a poignant turn, Are You Really Okay? Addresses someone else's pain. It seems Vessel is speaking to a loved one, perhaps a friend or even an aspect of himself who is self-destructing. and he feels helpless to save them. The song radiates despair and distance. He sees someone slipping away, possibly due to mental illness, addiction, or trauma, and he cannot reach them. This could mirror Vessel's own state. It's like an out-of-body reflection where he witnesses his own decline from a third-person perspective, asking, "Are you really okay?" When the answer is clearly no. This resonates with neurodivergent or highly empathetic individuals who often take on caretaker roles or feel others' pain deeply. Some fans have even speculated that the imagery in the single's art alludes to an infant or a miscarriage, adding to the album's tragic arc and implying layers of loss or failed responsibility. Within the narcissistic abuse framework, this song is unique because it's less about the abuser-victim dynamic and more about the collateral damage of trauma. Vessel's entanglement with sleep might be causing him to fail those who need him. It's a moment of clarity where he notices someone else's suffering, perhaps realizing how lost he's been. The deep sadness of "Are you really okay?" lies in its hopelessness. The distance is growing in the relationship, and he's powerless to stop the self-destruction. It's a feeling many in abusive situations have, being so consumed by their own chaotic world that they cannot be present for others, or seeing loved ones hurt and not knowing how to help because they themselves are drowning. As part of the Eden narrative, this track shows the cost of Vessel's devotion to sleep. Real human connections suffer or slip away whilst he is caught in the cycle.
And are you really okay?
This next track's title suggests ghosts or lingering spirits, which fits the content. The apparition deals with dialogues between Vessel and the entity Sleep, and emphasizes how Vessel is doomed to despair each time he wakes up. This sounds like Vessel's every day is haunted by what he's done and what he's lost. When morning comes, each time he wakes up, he's left with only memories and emptiness. His nights might be full of Sleep's presence, but daylight brings loneliness and the weight of reality. The apparition could be Sleep appearing at night, or it could be the ghost of Vessel's past, future that haunts him. Given all the callbacks in the album, this track underscores how impossible it is to tell if this story is linear or looping. It might be deliberately disorienting, much like the mental state of someone deep in trauma or dissociation. Time blurs, events repeat out of order. Thematically, the apparition reaffirms Vessel's doom loop. Even if he momentarily feels resolve, like possibly in the next track, the ghosts of his trauma and Sleep's influence continue to reappear. In abuse terms, this is the stage of being haunted by the abuse. Even if the abuser isn't present, the victim experiences flashbacks, emotional lows, and a persistent void, often a reason many return to the abuser to fill that void. If Sleep only visits at certain times, like a cyclical pattern, Vessel is left the rest of the time with an ache that nothing else can currently satisfy. A hallmark of trauma bonding, where the absence of the abuser causes distress and craving. The apparition thus captures the aftermath side of the cycle, the depressive slump when the abuser is not actively idealizing or present, when the victim wrestles with their own ghosts. Now, by my own admission, I really struggled with this next track. Thematically, it seems to be an outlier from the rest of the album. It doesn't fit the tone. And it isn't my perspective on this song that forced me to change my opinion on it. It was actually a theory that I had seen in another YouTube video and on Reddit and on the Sleep Token Discord. And it's the possibility that this song might be something from Vessel to Vessel. So, with Do You Wish That You Loved Me, we've arrived at a significant turning point. Despite its bubbly acronym and somewhat lighter musical touch, it being one of the least heavy songs. Its theme is profound. It could essentially be Vessel asking a question of self-worth and acceptance. And this track marks a shift away from repetition and towards acceptance and self-love. The question, "Do you wish that you loved me?" could be addressed to Sleep, to Vessel's former lover, or even to Vessel himself. It's almost childlike in its vulnerability, yearning for genuine love. Unlike previous songs, which dwelled in darkness, this one steps back and starts to seek a way out of the loop, if not through the other person's love, then perhaps through self-love. Fans have noted that it continues the dark themes of heartbreak and destruction, but crucially it begins to move away from the idea of repetition. It's more introspective and about acceptance. We might interpret this as Vessel confronting the fact that he cannot force someone, Sleep, or anyone to truly love him the way he needs, and that chasing that is killing him. The only solution is to accept himself and let go of this external need for validation. In narcissistic abuse recovery, this moment is vital, realizing the abuser will never change or give the love that one craves, and that healing has to come from within. "Do you wish that you love me?" suggests Vessel is finally leaning towards self-compassion. The oceanic imagery from the previous album is mentioned by fans, the idea of coming full circle to the start, the ocean, but this time with a sense of moving on. The song's gentle tone and heartfelt questioning indeed feel like an emotional breakthrough. It's as if Vessel, after all the chaos, sits down with himself and asks, "Why do I need their love so badly? Do I even love me? Could I even love me?" This seed of doubt in the cycle's validity is potentially the key to breaking it.
Just a stoic statue fit for nobody, and I don't wanna get in your way.
Following that revelation, Rain is like the cleansing after the storm. Thematically, it signals a washing away and a new beginning. Here, Vessel seems to have found a measure of self-knowledge and resolve. He explicitly states, "I know what I am, the mouth of the wolf, the eyes of the lamb." Fans interpret this line as Vessel recognizing his role as a false prophet for a false god, linking it to the biblical warning about wolves in sheep's clothing. This is hugely significant. Vessel finally calls out Sleep, and perhaps himself, for what it is, a deception. He likens himself to a prophet in wolf's clothing, implying Sleep is the wolf. He is the mouthpiece, disguised as something pure. By invoking Matthew 7:15, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing," Vessel acknowledges that the entire worship and saviour routine was a lie. This recognition is a massive step in breaking free from narcissistic abuse. Akin to the victim seeing through the gaslighting and idealization to the ugly truth of the abuser's manipulation. Musically and lyrically, Rain feels purifying. After finding self-love, Vessel is actively looking to end the destructive cycle. Rain can symbolize rebirth, the growth after fire, or tears cried and spent. At this juncture, Vessel appears ready to break away from Sleep's hold, armed with the understanding of who he is and who Sleep is. It's an empowering moment that contrasts dramatically with the despair of earlier songs. Essentially, Rain is Vessel reclaiming his identity, acknowledging both the dark wolf and the light lamb in himself without needing Sleep's definition. By seeing himself as the mouth of the wolf, he may also be taking responsibility for enabling Sleep's influence. He spread the messages, sang the tokens. This accountability often precedes the act of leaving. He sees his part and thus can choose differently now. The title track is a sweeping epic, that ties together the album's narrative threads. Take Me Back to Eden is filled with callbacks to previous songs and prior albums, as if summarizing the journey and grappling with the notion of escaping or completing the cycle. It reinforces the cyclical theme overtly. The line, "When we were made, it was no accident," first heard in Chokehold, reappears in this song. Vessel repeating that line could mean he's acknowledging the cycle as part of a larger design he's trapped in, trying to escape it. By doing so, ironically, he's still in it. Indeed, the lyric context suggests Vessel is desperately trying to break free, trying to escape the cycle, yet finds that even this struggle is just another part of the same cycle. The concept of Eden implies a paradise lost or a state of innocence Vessel longs for. In the biblical sense, the Garden of Eden is where man resided before it was ruined, tainted by a serpent. In my own story, my Eden is tainted by a serpent. It could be that the absence of pain, the simplicity of not knowing this trauma, essentially a desire to reset everything. There's an undercurrent of tragedy in that request. After all he's been through, Vessel yearns to undo it all and return to a time of purity, which for him might be before any of these relationships, a time of innocence or even death or rebirth. The music and lyrics likely alternate between hope and despair, embodying the seesaw of someone who tries to climb out only to slip back. Eden might also represent sleep's promise, a fake paradise which Vessel now sees as false, yet a part of him still nostalgically yearns for the idea of it. This track, being the penultimate one, suggests it contains the climax of emotion, possibly confrontation or final surrender. It's as if Vessel is negotiating with fate or sleep. Give me back the Eden I was promised, the bliss without the suffering. In an abuse context, it's that heartbreaking wish that the good times could come back without the bad. Something every victim wrestles with when deciding to leave, grieving the good that was intertwined with the bad. Take Me Back to Eden seems to acknowledge that that wish is impossible. You can't have the garden without acknowledging the serpent in it. Thus, it sets the stage for the finale, which might resolve whether the cycle truly ends or not. Euclid, the closing track, is named after the ancient mathematician famous for geometry, a subtle hint at patterns, lines, and the idea of coming full circle. Fittingly, the song ends the album and the trilogy by looping back to the very beginning of Sundowning. In the final verse, lyrics from "The Night Does Not Belong to God" are repeated verbatim. This startling move implies that the story has indeed come full circle. We are right back where we started. Vessel intones "I must be new," as if reborn, but immediately the repetition of the debut album's opening lines suggests the cycle has merely reset. Fans have taken this as a sign that this is the closing chapter of the first phase, meaning Vessel's saga with sleep might begin anew in future works. On a narrative level, it's like a time loop. After everything, Vessel ends up back at square one, perhaps as a new Vessel, hinting at future albums featuring a new character or a reawakening of the same dynamic. Thematically, this conclusion is both elegant and devastating. It underscores the central tenet that nothing ever truly ends and nothing lasts forever. Relationships erode, civilizations fall, and in this case, Vessel's attempt to break the cycle might have failed or only led him back to the start. In terms of an abusive relationship metaphor, Euclid suggests that Vessel, despite glimpsing self-awareness, has either fallen back under sleep's spell or that the psychological imprint is so deep that even if he leaves, he might find himself in a similar relationship again. Sobering reality for many survivors without healing. The repetition of the album's verse indicates eternal recurrence. Jungian concept that was hinted in Sleep Token's lore discussions. The story of vessel and sleep is perhaps one that is doomed to replay in cycles, which could also symbolize how trauma can be generational or persistent across one's life until truly resolved. As a closing note, Euclid leaves us pondering. Did Vessel truly free himself in rain, or is he locked in an endless worship loop? The ambiguity is intentional and thematically resonant. Sometimes survivors of abuse feel like they're finally out, only to find themselves emotionally back at the beginning, needing to heal all over again. On a more hopeful angle, one might also interpret that by quoting the beginning, Vessel, or the band, is asserting control over the narrative, consciously bringing it full circle to close that chapter, implying that any future content will be a new shape, a new Euclid, drawing new lines. Either way, it is a powerful ending that cements the trilogy's concept, a cyclical saga of love, pain, and rebirth. Examining the trilogy, we can now trace a clear, overarching narrative that mirrors the classic patterns of a narcissistic, abusive relationship. Often described as the cycle of idealize, devalue, and discard, with intermittent respite phases in between. Across Sundowning, This Place Will Become Your Tomb, and Take Me Back to Eden, Vessel goes through these stages, not just once, but in repeated loops, highlighting the concept of trauma bonding that keeps drawing him back. With this narrative and knowledge of my own story, it's very easy to see how I identified with this band and their music so deeply. Even if you don't know me personally or know the person or people that might be referenced as sleep within my own story, the themes are universal. Themes like idealization and love bombing. In the beginning, both the implied backstory with Atlantic and Hypnosis, and then Sundown's early tracks like This Night Does Not Belong to God and The Offering, sleep presents as a savior and a paradise. Vessel is flooded with divine love, promises of purpose, of comfort. This is the honeymoon phase, where Vessel experiences ecstasy, believing he has found meaning. Sleep entices Vessel with love bombing, the affection he has been starved of. Like a textbook narcissist, Sleep puts Vessel on a pedestal initially. Vessel is the chosen one, special enough to be Sleep's vessel. Vessel's needs and traumas are seemingly answered by Sleep's grandiose love. This establishes an intense emotional bond quickly, just as an abuser might with flattery, intense romance, or in this case, mystical experiences. As Vessel becomes hooked, he increasingly isolates from his past life and other relationships, for example, leaving behind his ex-lover and distancing from reality. Sleep positions herself as the sole source of truth and love for Vessel. In Sundowning and This Place Will Become Your Tomb, we saw how Vessel's world shrinks to just sleep. The water is a tomb, representing the death of his autonomy. Vessel's identity and purpose get entirely redefined in relation to sleep. Sleep's control grows as Vessel yields decision-making and even his body. Take a bite, sink your teeth. This corresponds to the isolation and control phase in abuse. The victim becomes dependent on the abuser for validation and is cut off from dissenting voices. By the time of songs like Mine and Give, Sleep overtly asserts ownership and Vessel acquiesces. A hierarchical power structure is cemented, literally worshipper to God. Vessel believes he needs sleep to survive, which is the crux of emotional dependency. Once Vessel is firmly dependent, sleep's darker side fully emerges. Vessel experiences neglect, confusion, and cruelty from sleep. The resentful snarls and the parasitic demands described in the offering escalate into psychological torment. Sleep alternates between giving and withholding affection, which is evident in the oscillation of songs like Sugar, where a vessel is addicted to the pain, and Gods, where vessel is in agony and anger. During devaluation, the abuser often makes the victim feel unworthy, crazy, or at fault. We see vessel internalizing the blame. I hate who I have become, and feeling like he must change to earn love, the love that you want. Sleep's manipulation can be subtle, e.g. implanting the idea that any love vessel seeks will fail, except sleep's, as in Chokehold, with its prophecy of things going wrong. Sleep also gaslights vessel by presenting as both protector and destroyer, which confuses vessel's reality. One moment sleep says, I'll keep you safe if you give in. The next vessel is left feeling utterly unsafe without sleep. This intermittent reinforcement is core to trauma bonding. Vessel clings harder when devalued, trying to win back favor. At various points, Vessel faces real or perceived abandonment. For instance, in Sundowning's Drag Me Under, he feels cast aside and only worthy of brief moments of love. He begs to be dragged under again, implying he's been left adrift before. In This Place Will Become Your Tomb's Distraction and Missing Limbs, we see Vessel feeling it's too late and that he's empty, essentially discarded as an individual. Sleep's ultimate discard is turning Vessel into a husk, solely for sleep's use, meaning Vessel the person is discarded. In Take Me Back to Eden, discard appears metaphorically when Vessel reaches lows like in Granite and Are You Really Okay? Perhaps losing someone may be reflecting his own neglect. The fear of abandonment is also leveraged. Sleep often returns with vulnerability or need. Fall for me, where sleep admits I am lost without you, precisely when Vessel walk away, thus pulling him back in. In my case, a text telling me that they're having a bad day. This push-pull of discard and hoovering, the abuser reeling the victim back in, is a well-documented cycle. Vessel repeatedly nearly breaks, even attempts suicide, but sleep never truly lets him go, and Vessel, trauma-bonded, cannot let sleep go either. Throughout all three albums, the lyricism paints a picture of someone who is aware of the harm. I made it a blood sport, and we can't resist the violence, yet they can't leave. The psychological root is that Vessel equates this pain with love at a visceral level. Sleep has become both the poison and the cure in Vessel's mind. As described in psychological terms, the more the codependent reaches out to the narcissist for love, the more the trauma bond is strengthened. And we see this in Vessel offering more of himself each time he's hurt. Songs like Sugar, Addicted to the Pain, and Vor, Desiring to be Consumed, are stark evidence of how trauma bonding has altered Vessel's desires. He doesn't just tolerate the abuse, a part of him seeks it because it's intertwined with the only love he knows. The albums show this progressively intensifying by the end of This Place Will Become Your Tomb. Vessel's bond is so strong he literally gives his life for it. And in Take Me Back to Eden, even with glimmers of realization, he struggles to break the emotional chain. From start to finish, Vessel's sense of self is systematically dismantled. Initially, he is a person with heartbreak and longing. By the midpoint, calls himself Vessel unironically. His name, his role, sleep's influence makes him feel inadequate, ugly, no God, as flashed in Fall For Me's video. Reinforcing that Vessel's own personhood is worthless, Vessel adopts labels like prophet or mouth of the wolf, which define him only in relation to sleep. In the end, he literally becomes a proxy for sleep, the Euclid loop where sleep speaks through him. This reflects how victims of long-term narcissistic abuse often describe losing their identity, becoming a shell of who they were. Vessel's journey vividly externalizes that. His mask and persona, Vessel, overtake the man beneath. The lore suggests that Vessel might not even remember his actions while under sleep's thrall, akin to dissociation or the blurred reality abused individuals face. The phantom limb metaphor in Missing Limbs also drives it home. He feels the loss of something vital, his love, his self, but it's intangible, a ghost pain. The trilogy doesn't just tell a single story, it loops, as seen by Take Me Back to Eden's ending, reflecting Sundowning's start. This suggests what psychologists call repetition compulsion, a trauma victim unconsciously recreating similar situations to gain mastery or a different outcome. Vessel's soul, we might say, keeps reenacting the fall into abusive worship in different forms, perhaps even across lifetimes or metaphysical cycles in the lore. This lends the narrative a mythic quality. Sleep and Vessel are locked in an eternal waltz of worship and pain, much like a cursed pair. But it's also a cautionary note on how, without intervention, one might find themselves in the same patterns again and again, even if the faces change. In essence, Sleep Token's albums collectively craft an allegory of a narcissistic abuse cycle on a cosmic scale. Vessel's relationship with sleep serves as a metaphor for any abusive dynamic where one party wields power and the other is enthralled. The highs are heaven high, ecstasy, worship, and feeling chosen, but the lows are hellishly deep. Despair, loss of self, literal thoughts of death. The constant is the imbalance of power and the narcissist's insatiable need for devotion at the expense of the devotee's well-being. Sleep epitomizes a narcissistic abuser. Charismatic, powerful, giving Vessel glimpses of intense love, but ultimately feeding on Vessel's worship and casting him aside when it suits. Vessel represents the entrapped lover, trauma-bonded, self-sacrificing, aware of the toxicity, but unable to break free due to the deep psychological hooks installed by the abuser. In summary, stripped of all the mystical aesthetic, Sleep is an abusive partner that Vessel believed he cannot live without, and staying hurts him more in the long term. Worshipping Sleep shows the danger of putting someone on a pedestal in a relationship. And this statement truly encapsulates the overarching narrative. Sleep Token's lore might involve gods and dreams, but at its heart, it's telling a story as old as time, of love twisted by control and pain, a cycle that one must either break or be broken by. Sleep Token's thematic exploration of an abusive, one-sided relationships align closely with psychological profiles of narcissistic abuse. By analysing the Vessel-Sleep dynamic, we can glean insight into real-world patterns of such toxic relationships, and also consider why these themes might strongly resonate with certain listeners, especially those like me who are neurodivergent. Narcissistic abuse refers to the emotional, physiological, and sometimes physical abuse inflicted by someone with narcissistic traits or a narcissistic personality disorder upon their partner. Key features include manipulation, a lack of empathy, and an insidious cycle of idealizing and devaluing the victim. As we identified in the narrative, Sleep's behavior ticks many narcissistic boxes. Grandiose of self-importance, she literally demands worship. Entitlement, Vessel will be mine with no equality. Exploitative tendencies, using Vessel as an instrument, e.g. each song as a token for Sleep. And a lack of true empathy, Sleep appears indifferent to Vessel's suffering unless it threatens her supply, at which point he feigns vulnerability. These map onto the diagnostic criteria for narcissism, such as exploitive behavior, a need for admiration and attention, and arrogance. One of the most salient aspects depicted is the narcissistic abuse cycle, typically described in phases: idealize, devalue, and discard. Sometimes with a hoovering phase, where the abuser re-idolizes to pull the victim back, Vessel's journey shows multiple iterations of this. Idealization. Sleep showers Vessel with meaning, beauty, purpose, e.g. thread the needle. Fascination, offering comfort, Vessel is made to feel special and needed. Devaluation. Sleep becomes cold, demanding sacrifices, causing Vessel to feel inadequate and desperate. You will be mine. You're not enough unless you change. Vessel experiences anger, self-hatred, confusion, as in songs like Gods and Like That. The narcissist's affection is replaced with disdain or neglect, which we saw when Vessel felt abandoned or not loved in return. The discard. Eventually, Vessel is left in the dark, essentially discarded as an autonomous being. Whether sleep literally leaves or just emotionally withdraws, Vessel hits rock bottom. Missing limbs, emptiness, drag me under, acceptance of being nothing. The discard can be as extreme as sleep allowing Vessel to attempt suicide or become a shell. The hoovering and the return to idealize. Just when Vessel might break away or die, sleep hoovers him back in. Appearing at Vessel's lowest, the Atlantic intervention, or pleading in Fall for Me. This restarts the cycle, giving Vessel hope again. This exact cycle is noted by abuse recovery experts. The narcissist idealizes, often through love bombing, intense flattery, or fast attachment. Things like the love of my life, when you've heard it 3 or 4 times already within a year, are telltale signs. Then devalues, criticizes, belittles, withdraws affection, and eventually discards, often suddenly, leaving the victim traumatized. Then many narcissists repeat this cycle with the same victim by hoovering, doing something to suck the victim back in, like apologize, promise, or send text messages appearing vulnerable. Sleep's moments of sudden tenderness or promise, this is the start of something, ketamine, or sleep promising to always be there if Vessel submits, give, serve this hoover function. As a result, Vessel experiences intermittent reinforcement, one of the most powerful conditioners of human behavior. The unpredictable switch between cruelty and kindness keeps him hooked, just as a gambler gets hooked by random payoffs. Underlining this cycle is the concept of trauma bonding, which we've mentioned. Trauma bonding is when a victim forms a strong emotional attachment to an abuser due to cycles of abuse interspersed with reward. In Sleep's token narrative, the trauma bond is clear. No matter how much sleep hurts Vessel, he keeps returning, rationalizing and craving the next moment of closeness. According to psychologists, victim in trauma bonds often believe they just need to understand what they are doing wrong to bring back the loving part of the relationship. Vessel exemplifies this in songs like The Love You Want, where he is ready to change himself to fit what Sleep, or his ex, desires. He thinks he is the problem, trying harder and giving more of himself as in offering and sugar instead of recognizing the abuse. This is exactly what trauma bonds do. The victim focuses on the good times and on winning back the abuser's approval rather than the abuser's constant harm. The neurochemistry of trauma bonding is akin to addiction. The highs, love bombing and intimacy, cause dopamine and oxytocin releases, while the lows cause stress and longing, which make the brain crave the highs again. Vessel's lyric "addicted to the pain" is almost literal in this sense. His brain has been trained to equate pain with eventual pleasure or relief, and the reconciliation with sleep. In my own scenario, I once received a text message asking me if I was glad we'd made up. This cycle can override the victim's rational judgment, keeping them trapped. Indeed, logically, Vessel knows that staying hurts him in the long term, but the trauma bond is stronger than logic or self-preservation. Another psychological aspect portrayed is gaslighting and self-doubt. Sleep rarely gives clear truth. His messages are cryptic or double-edged. The truth is, I am no god, flashing briefly, confusing Vessel. Vessel is often unsure of what's real. In the depths of his subconscious, he comes to terms with it. implying even that acceptance is in a dreamlike state. This is reminiscent of gaslighting, where the abuser controls the narrative such that the victim questions their own reality and memory. The static and memory loss motifs, like at the end of This Place Will Become Your Tomb, and references to Alzheimer's sundowning, symbologically tie to this effect. Vessel's confusion and memory resets are a metaphor for how abuse can leave one feeling disorientated and unable to trust one's own mind. Gaslighting often leads to the victim feeling like a shell, exactly how Vessel ends up, with a Swiss-cheesed memory and identity. The albums also illustrate the long-term effects of narcissistic abuse, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and complex PTSD. Vessel's suicidal ideation in Atlantic, his self-harm imagery, trenches of scars, and hopelessness, it's too late for me, all point to severe symptoms. Sleep Token's music viscerally captures the mental health decline of someone in such a relationship. And by Take Me Back to Eden, Vessel has signs of complex trauma, emotional numbness alternating with extreme emotional swings, a fractured sense of self, and possibly a dissociation, seeing himself as if from the outside in Are You Really Okay? Now, to relate this to neurodivergent individuals and the community that I'm trying to foster here, neurodivergence encompasses conditions like autism spectrum disorders, ADHD, other atypical neurological profiles. And there are a few angles worth considering. Emerging discussions in psychology suggest that neurodivergent people can be more vulnerable to abusive relationships, including narcissistic abuse. One reason is that many neurodivergent individuals, especially those undiagnosed or unsupported, may have traits that narcissists exploit. For example, autistic and ADHD individuals are often exceptionally trusting, literal, and unaware of manipulative social cues. They might not recognize the red flags of love bombing versus genuine affection, or they may take promises at face value. In Sleep's law, Vessel could be seen as literal-minded and idealistic in his worship. He believes wholeheartedly in Sleep's grandeur and ignores the dark signs. This parallels to how an autistic person might earnestly latch on to a narcissist's flattery and excuses, but not pick up on their lies or sarcasm that others might notice. Autistic folks also often idealize others and can have intense special interests or attachment. If a narcissist becomes the focus, that intensity can fuel the trauma. Vessel's obsessive devotion could resonate with someone who knows the feeling of focusing intensely on a person or idea. As one therapist notes, we often see the best in people and project an idealized version. This can cost us dearly in romantic relationships. Vessel projecting godhood and perfection onto Sleep despite evidence of cruelty is akin to this trait. Contrary to stereotypes, many autistic and ADHD individuals have high empathy and feel others' emotions strongly, sometimes to the point of confusion about whose feelings are whose. They may also have a strong desire to help or fix others. Narcissists prey on the vulnerable and those who are highly empathetic, because such individuals are more likely to excuse or forgive the abuse. Vessel constantly forgiving or rationalizing Sleep's behavior, maybe it's my fault, maybe if I just give more, echoes the mindset of an empath who cannot conceive that their beloved wants to hurt them. The line, many of us are highly empathetic, meaning we may excuse and tolerate behaviors that others would not, fits perfectly here. Vessel tolerates the intolerable because he feels Sleep's pain or need, especially when Sleep pleads in full for me. Additionally, neurodivergent individuals might struggle with self-esteem due to years of not fitting in or being misunderstood. This can create a vulnerability where any love or acceptance feels like a godsend. Vessel clearly has self-worth issues. I hate who I have become. I am inadequate. I am ugly, which makes him latched onto Sleep's validation. A narcissist can become a sole validator for a neurodivergent person who has faced social rejection, establishing a dangerous dynamic. Many autistic fans have expressed that Sleep Token's music resonates with them deeply. The intensity of feelings, the struggle of communication. Vessel communicates in metaphors and grand gestures, something autistic individuals who have difficulty articulating emotions might relate to. And the concept of having a rich inner world, the dream realm, with sleep are all aspects that align with neurodivergent experiences. For example, some autistic people describe having imaginary friends or inner fantasies in youth to cope with loneliness. Sleep in the law could be interpreted as a part of Vessel's psyche, a Jungian shadow as mentioned in the law, something a neurodivergent person might personify to process emotions. Vessel's devotion to an unseen entity might mirror how one can get lost in their own world or fixated interest. The themes of emotional overwhelm in the song, violence, intermixed with love, can also hit home for many autistic individuals who often feel emotions as an all or nothing way. The band's dynamic shifts from whisper soft to brutally heavily might parallel the sensory and emotional highs and lows that ND people experience, e.g. the sensory overload or meltdown versus intense focus and calm, things we've discussed in previous episodes. Music as a safe processing. For many ND folks, sometimes we connect with music to process feelings that are hard to express. Sleep Token's anonymity and symbolic storytelling provide a canvas onto which listeners can project their own struggles safely. A neurodivergent fan might identify with Vessel's feeling of being controlled or consumed by something, be it a person or a fixation or even their condition, and find catharsis in the music. In online forums, some fans mention the concept of sleep, an all-encompassing force, resonates as a metaphor for things like depression or obsessive interest that they worship to the detriment of themselves. The law's ambiguity allows neurodivergent listeners to insert their personal narrative, which might be social anxiety or longing for connection, etc., and still find validation. From a clinical perspective, there is evidence that undiagnosed autistic women, for instance, have high rates of ending up in abusive relationships. One Psychology Today article suggests autistic girls who go undiagnosed may be more likely to grow up to be women who struggle with abusive relationships. The reason includes all of the factors we've discussed above. Difficulty recognizing predatory behaviors, craving acceptance, and being targeted by narcissists who find their traits easy to exploit. Likewise, ADHDers may jump into passionate relationships impulsively and then struggle to exit even when they turn sour due to rejection sensitivity and emotional dysregulation. In summary, the psychological patterns depicted in Sleep Token's albums, trauma bonding, intermittent reinforcement, and identity loss, are well recognized in narcissistic abuse cases. The band's creative framing makes these concepts accessible on a visceral level. For neurodivergent individuals who might either be statistically at higher risks for such relationships or simply experience emotions intensely and differently, these themes can strike a particularly deep chord. Vessel's longing to be loved and subsequent entrapment might mirror an autistic person's longing for understanding and the pain being taken advantage of. His final realization that he was a false prophet for a false god could represent the empowering moment ND individuals achieve when they're overcoming gaslighting and trusting their own perception again. Trusting your gut is crucial, but it can be harder for autistic people, a lesson learned through such stories. Ultimately, Sleep Token's narrative validates the experience of those in toxic relationships, and its psychological depth provides solace that someone out there gets it. Translating the often indescribable cycle of abuse into song for neurodivergent fans is not only gets it emotionally, but also perhaps gives language or metaphor to experiences they feel on the outside of the neurotypical norm, showing that their feelings and struggles are heard and represented in art. The lore of Sleep Token is deliberately cryptic, encouraging young fans to theorize and find personal meaning. Over the years, a rich community discussion has emerged across Reddit, YouTube, and other forums, analyzing the band's story and themes. Many of these interpretations reinforce the abusive relationship narrative and add layers to it. The Trilogy of Trauma, fan video essays. One notable YouTube analysis by a fan known as Sleep Token Luke dubs the 3 albums of Trilogy. This video essay looks at the albums as a journey of trauma, aligning with the perspective that Vessel's story is about being trapped in and eventually confronting an abusive cycle. Viewers have reacted emotionally to this take, with some saying they were overwhelmed processing how the music reflects real psychological turmoil. And the popularity of this essay, hundreds of thousands of views, indicates how strongly the trauma narrative resonates. It lightly walks through each album, showing how trauma builds, is relived, and perhaps how one attempts to break free, as much as we have. The fact that multiple fans refer others to this video suggests it has become a cornerstone interpretation within the community. It validates that Sleep Token's work is more than metal and R&B fusion. It's a journey of trauma, a phrase that has clearly struck a chord. On r/Sleep Token, a Reddit forum, dedicated fans have compiled complete lore posts and answered questions like who is Sleep? In one discussion, a user suggests Sleep could be seen as a direct metaphor for an abusive lover, a deity. Vessel writes his music as tokens of worship too. I would go one step further and give this individual a name. However, for the sake of anonymity, I won't. This succinctly captures the consensus. Sleep, the abusive lover, songs, offerings to appease that lover. The Reddit community often dissects lyrics and finds evidence of this. For instance, they noticed how the final song Euclid repeats Sundowning's intro, interpreting it as the story looping, confirming the tragical cycle theory. They also exchanged theories about details, for example, the significance of colours, scarlet and ultraviolet, representing incompatible perspectives, or the meaning of character names, Vessel as a title rather than a person's name. These fan-driven analyses echo much of what we've covered, showing how observant and invested this community is in the lore of Sleep's depth. Some even connect Sleep Token's story to mythological or literary archetypes, comparing Sleep to Hypnos or to Jung's shadow self, enriching the narrative with broader context. Aside from the formal essays, many YouTube reactors and the music reviewers have commented on Sleep Token's thematic content. Some approach it song by song, noting reactions like the magic of Sleep Token, there's a lot more to this song that we didn't even touch on, acknowledging layers of meaning. Others delve into specific tracks. For one example, one might focus on High Water and discuss mental health, as hinted by a reaction video title. There are also videos entitled Exploring the Concept, where the speaker explicitly mentions liking the concept of a forgotten god manipulating a depressed human, which directly ties into our interpretation of Sleep exploiting Vessel. These indicate that even casual listeners pick up on the narrative of manipulation and mental anguish. Fans have parsed everything from music videos to merch symbols to find lore cues. For instance, the Fall For Me videos flash in text, which we mentioned was a hot topic. Fans saw it essentially as Sleep's confession and Vessel's final step into worship. Another example in the Love You Want music video with the red cave, sword, and dancers was interpreted as representing Vessel's heart and how the endless cycle of trying to cut away his feelings, tying bows to a tree as repeated wishes. Fans noted how Vessel is overpowered in the dance, symbolizing how his desire is defeated by reality. This aligns with the narcissistic imbalance of power and Vessel's desperation. Some community members enjoy comparing Sleep Token's lore to mythology or religion. Sleep is sometimes likened to a demon or an eldritch being that grants power at a steep price, aka to Faustian bargains. Others see parallel with stories of gods and priests. Vessel is a priest who gives too much to a capricious deity. The Jungian interpretation. Sleep as Vessel's shadow self suggests the struggle is internal. Vessel fighting his own darkness, depression, destructive tendencies, given form as sleep. In that light, the abusive relationship could also represent one's battle with their mental illness or addiction, a reading that some fans embrace for its psychological nuance. Sleep Token's broader metaphor thus allows multiple layers. Literal abusive lover or a personification of inner demons. Both readings result in similar emotional beats, which is part of the law's beauty. It's flexible, yet coherent. On forums and comment sections, one can find self-identified, neurodivergent fans discussing how they connect with Vessel's narrative. Some have mentioned that they see sleep as a metaphor for a neurodivergent hyperfixation or special interest that is both comforting and isolating, an interpretation that strays from the relational abuse angle, but is interestingly parallels it, the idea of loving something that controls you and cuts you off from others. Others talk about the emotional intensity of the music, helping them through autistic meltdowns or ADHD emotional swings. Whilst these are anecdotal, it highlights how the fandom engages deeply with the content beyond a surface level. Sleep Token's anonymity and focus on concept over personal identity also seem to appeal to those who feel othered or faceless themselves, a point fans raise. Vessel could be anyone, which helps listeners project themselves into the story. The community's collective analysis only enhances our understanding. Fans note things like how memory loss is a recurring motif tied to the idea of sundowning, a medical term, reinforcing the theme of forgetting to stay in an abusive relationship. They piece together the continuity of the story through lyrical callbacks. We've cited many, which were likely initially spotted by eagle-eyed listeners. The dedication to deciphering the crumbs left by the band, the runes, the ciphers, the coordinates, also indicates how Sleep Token has fostered a participatory lore experience, which can be both therapeutic and engaging for fans dealing with their own issues, as it gives a sense of mission and discovery. In conclusion, the fan and critical interpretations of Sleep Token's work widely recognizes the depth of the band's thematic content. Whether one views it as strictly a fantastical lore or as a metaphor for personal struggles, the consensus is that the trilogy tells a cohesive story of love, loss, and pain. The abusive relationship lens is heavily supported by fan analysis, and this has become a common understanding within the community. These community insights underscore how effective Sleep Token has been in creating art that is not only musically compelling, but narratively and psychologically rich. Listeners don't just consume Sleep Token's music, they engage with it, discuss it, even find bits of themselves within it. This collaborative interpretation across YouTube, essays, Reddit threads has essentially created a shared mythology that adds to the emotional weight of the music.
My love's eyes like fire, I'm a winged insect, you're a funeral pyre. Come now, bite through these wires, I'm a waking hell, and the gods grow tired.
I unironically chose that section of Take Me Back to Eden to use as an interlude because my own version of Sleep, my own deity, once unironically sent me a photo of her eyes to use in a tattoo interpretation of this chorus, picturing me as the literal moth to a flame within her eyes. Finally, 2 hours and 9.5 minutes in, we've reached my conclusion. And that bats this art as an emotional catharsis, and it's about empowerment. Sleep Token's trilogy of albums, Sundowning, This Place Will Become Your Tomb, and Take Me Back to Eden, stands as an ambitious, emotionally charged narrative of a soul entwined in toxic devotion. Through the allegory of vessel and the deity sleep, the band has given voice to the often voiceless experience of living through narcissistic abuse and trauma bonding. Each song, as we have seen, isn't just a piece of music, but an offering laden with meaning. From the euphoric highs of love's first blush to the abyssal lows of heartbreak and identity loss. By examining every track, we traced a clear storyline of emotional dependency, control, and the erosion and reclamation of self. Vessel's journey is painfully familiar to anyone who has loved someone who was simultaneously their tormentor. It captures the confusion of being in a chokehold, yet mistaking it for an embrace. In concrete terms, the albums illustrate the psychological phenomena like love bombing, the night does not belong to God in seduction, gaslighting, Vessel's memory fog and self-doubt, trauma bonding with sugar and Drag Me Under's resignation to addiction and pain, and the final steps of either breaking free with Rain's self-realization or falling back in Euclid's loop to square one. Importantly, Sleep Token doesn't read like a dry case study. It immerses us in the emotional reality of these concepts. The shift in musical dynamics from delicate piano melodies to crushing riffs mirror the volatility of an abusive relationship. Vessel's lyrics veer between the poetic worship and raw despair, reflecting trauma's non-linear nature. And this artful representation helps listeners feel the psychological patterns we've analysed. It's one thing to say trauma bonds make it harder to leave. It's another to hear Vessel whispering "just drag me under again" with aching defeat and truly grasp the allure of going back to the pain you know. From a psychological research standpoint, Sleep Token's narrative aligns with what we know about narcissistic abuse, the cyclical abuse patterns, the intense bonding that occurs under intermittent reward and punishment, and the profound mental health impact on the victim. The added layers we explored is how neurodivergent individuals might especially connect to these themes, whether due to heightened vulnerability to such abuse or simply seeing their own emotional intensity reflected in Vessel's epic saga. In that sense, the music can be both a mirror and a guide. A mirror showing them they're not alone in feeling control or lost, and a guide by implicitly encouraging self-reflection. For example, when Vessel asks, "Do you wish that you loved me?" many listeners find themselves confronting their own need for external validation versus self-love. The community discussions and video essays we've included show that Sleep Token's art has sparked meaningful conversation and analysis. Fans dissecting the lore are, in effect, processing the story's emotional content collectively. This kind of engagement can be healing. It allows people to intellectualize and externalize a painful topic, in abuse and heartbreak, in the safe playground of myth and music. The anonymity of the band and the abstract nature of Sleep as a character paradoxically makes the feelings more universal. Vessel could be any of us. Sleep could be any vice or person that's harmed us. Thus, the band's music becomes a vessel, pun intended, for listeners' own stories and catharsis. In conclusion, Sleep Token's trilogy serves as a powerful, emotional, and artistic expression of experiencing and overcoming or succumbing to an abusive, narcissistic relationship. It validates the pain and complexity of such entanglements, illustrating why one might stay even when it hurts, how one's sense of self can fracture, how escape is a process and not a moment. At the same time, through its very creation, it offers a form of exorcism. Vessel pours out the trauma in his haunting vocals and lyrics, perhaps finding release in the act of musical worship. Even if the character he portrays remains stuck, for listeners, the act of witnessing this story can similarly be an emotional release. The albums collectively reassure those who have lived through similar pain that their feelings are not isolated. They are part of a narrative arc that many travel, and importantly, an arc that can bend towards self-realization and freedom. The final note of the trilogy, looping back to the beginning, is a sobering reminder that healing is non-linear, and that some patterns may recur until truly broken. Yet, the knowledge is gained and never lost. Even if Vessel ends where he began, we as an audience have journeyed with him and seen behind the veil. The hope is that, unlike in the myth, one can break the cycle. And perhaps that is Sleep Token's quiet gift to their fans. By dramatizing the cycle so vividly, they've helped listeners recognize it in their own lives and inspired them to seek their own way out of the dark, towards their own personal Eden of peace and self-love. Ultimately, Sleep Token has transformed the harrowing, private experience of abuse into a communal, cathartic art piece. In doing so, they fostered understanding and sympathy, both for those who bear such silent scars and for the wounded parts in each of us that crave love and meaning. Their music is at once a lament, a warning, and a solace. This is what makes it a profound foundation for further discussion, be it on blog or podcasts, or in the confidences shared between friends who feel finally seen. So what do we do with all of this? The grief, the worship, the loops that never seem to end. For me, this album trilogy wasn't just music. It was a language that I can understand when I can't speak. It's a place to pour all of the fragmented parts of myself that don't fit neatly into conversation. It's a highly relatable and personal story of my last 12 months and the few years prior to that. Now, I've hinted at the identity of sleep, but the truth is, sleep in my life has been more than one person. There have been at least 2 cycles, which is again another reason why this album speaks to me and its looping nature. Now, there have been plenty of references to past lovers where my own toxicity might have done the damage, and if they listen, they'll know who they are. For many of us who are neurodivergent, emotional expression isn't always linear. It isn't always visible, but music, especially music like this, can help us not only feel, but be felt. Thank you for spending this time with me today. You made it to the end of this episode. Feel free to drop me a message with your opinions on who might be who within my stories. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who might also need to hear it. I'd enjoy it if you could listen to this and then go back and listen to Sleep Token's music through this lens. You can find more reflections, writing, and upcoming episodes over on my blog and on YouTube. Until next time, be kind to yourself, listen closely to the echoes within, and keep navigating your life with you at the center.
Call me when you have the time. I just need